So in this video, we're going to get started on the power, and in order to have power going to your Arduino based Proton pack, you're going to need a battery, and the battery that we have chosen to use for this particular project is going to be a Talent Cell battery. This one happens to be 3000 milliamps. You can also purchase them in 6000 milliamps and maybe even higher. I have not checked, but these come really highly recommended by the Ghostbusters prop community for their price, low price, as well as ease of use. And this is the second or third one I've used. I've not had any issues with them. You just charge them up with a power adapter, and it comes with all the accessories that you need to get it working in your Proton pack. Now, there are a couple of differences between the batteries. This particular one is 3000 milliamps, and it does not have a USB power output or input. The 6000 milliamp does. So if you were to purchase, say, the 6000 milliamp, you would be able to use that as your sole source of power, and you would not need the buck converters because you would be able to output a 12-volt power source as well as a 5-volt power source. But since this is the 3000 milliamp version, and I think it's important to know how to use buck converters or step down connectors, then this battery is ideal for that. I also purchased a extender connector that connects to the barrel jack on the Talent Cell battery that already has stripped leads coming off of it, so that I did not have to cut one of these wires off in order to strip the wires down to the leads, so I would have something to solder to my buck converters. So basically what we're going to do is we're going to take the Talent Cell battery, the cable, which is this cable right here that I purchased from Micro Center. It was about $6. So this, I bought this instead of having to cut one of the existing wires. This just plugs right into the male end of the jack that comes with the Talent Cell, and then you have your two positive and negative leads coming off of that, which you can then solder to anything you want. So now I have my two buck converters, and I'm using two of them because I have two devices that need to be powered with 5 volts of power. I tried to originally connect just one buck converter and power both the Arduino Nano and the DF player with the same buck converter, but I ran into issues doing that. So someone suggested that the DF player needed to have its own power source, so that is why I'm using two buck converters instead of just one. And then my audio amplifier board can be powered by the 12 volts coming directly from the battery, so it does not need to go through a buck converter in order to power the audio amplifier. And this is my audio amplifier board right here. It is 50 watts stereo. I do not know exactly what the model number is off the top of my head, but you can look in this description, as I will be leaving a link to that in the description, and as well as you can check the parts list from some of my previous videos where I listed all of the parts. You're also going to need a multimeter, which we're going to use to check the voltage on the buck converter to make sure that the buck converter is getting the proper amount of voltage coming through it, so that when we connect the other end of it to our devices, we do not fry them, because it is very easy to fry an Arduino and or other 5 volts devices if you plug them in and give them too much power, which you will see me do momentarily. Most of these multimeters come with instructions on how to connect them. I got this one from Harbor Freight. It was about I think it was about $6 or so. They're super cheap. You can get them just about anywhere that sells hardware related stuff, Home Depot, Walmart, that sort of thing. I got this one from Harbor Freight because it was cheap and it works well enough. I've never had anything or had any issues with anything that I've purchased from Harbor Freight. A lot of people go there because they have really inexpensive tools and things that are useful for us as prop makers. I actually got an airbrush from there that I really like, and you can get a lot of cool stuff from there. So, but make sure when you're connecting your multimeter that you either watch a YouTube video or just thoroughly read the instructions that came with it. Make sure that you have your wires connected properly, and you'll see the numbers on the top that shows us what the current voltage of whatever we have the multimeter connected to is. Of course, right now we don't have it connected to anything, so it is showing up as 0. In just a minute, I'm going to go ahead and connect these leads to my buck converter. Once I have the leads soldered from my talent cell to the buck converter, and we're going to see how much voltage is going into the buck converter and try to stop that down to 5 volts. So now what we're going to need to do is solder these 2 leads coming from the talent cell battery to these 2 points on the end of the buck converter. There is a positive and a negative on one side that is going to be our input, and then on the other side we have a positive and a negative that's going to be our output. So if you're connecting the wires to the input, that's the signal coming in, and then if you're connecting wires to the output, that is the signal going out. The talent cell battery connects directly to the buck converter in this way, and then we need to adjust the voltage by using this little potentiometer. It's more or less a screw on the top of it that you need a really tiny screwdriver in order to adjust. And then what you're going to want to do is take your multimeter and just attach the different connection points, the ground and the positive, to the outputs of the buck converter. And once you do that, the multimeter will then display the current voltage that's being given to the buck converter. So you don't want to do it to the input. So don't connect the multimeter to the input side of the buck converter, because that's just going to give you the voltage of the battery, and we need to know the voltage of the actual power once it's being stepped down by the buck converter. So the first thing we're going to need to do is go ahead and solder the leads from our talent cell battery to the input side of the buck converter using the positive and negative points. We've been soldering a lot at this point, so you guys should definitely know how to do that at this point. And then we're going to connect all of this to our DF player mini that controls our sound as well as our audio amplifier. It has connection points as well, and we can actually connect the leads coming off of the talent cell battery directly to the audio amplifier. It doesn't need to go through a buck converter. So at the end of this, you're going to end up with 3 sets of leads. You're going to have one set that's going to be 12 volts coming directly from the battery. Then you're going to have another set of leads that are coming to one buck converter that's going to be stepped down to 5 volts. And then you're going to have another set of leads coming off going to another buck converter, also stop down to 5 volts. And all those are going to be soldered together, and then you can use some heat shrink tubing to make those connections secure. And you'll see in just a second when I start soldering exactly how I go about doing that. And I'm going to cut some wire as usual, just some short lengths to get us started, and then we'll go ahead and get those soldered onto the buck converter. So what I'm doing now is I'm taking each of the positive and the negative leads from the talent cell battery, and I'm doubling those up. So basically I'm taking the single positive lead from the talent cell, and then I'm adding 2 more leads to the end of it so that I have 2 leads instead of 1, and I'm soldering those together. So you can see how I have the red positive wire with 2 more red positive wires joined together to make 2 separate leads coming out of the talent cell battery. And you'd want to put some heat shrink tubing around that to secure that. I have not done it yet in this part of the video, but I will do that at some point. So So don't get mad at me for not putting that on there just yet. I do add it later. But you're going to end up with 2 separate positive leads, so that you can connect that to 2 different sides or 2 different buck converters. I'm going to do the exact same thing with the negative side, with the negative lead. So you'll just do exactly the same thing there. So once you have that done, it's time to attach those wires to the actual buck converter. You're going to do exactly what I explained earlier, which is to take a positive lead that you just created and solder that to the positive in on the buck converter, just like I'm doing right here. I have this sped up a little bit so it doesn't take quite as long to get through it, because this is already a long video. We're going to do the same thing to the other side with the negative lead, solder that to the positive, or to the negative, sorry. Once you have those together, you're going to take the tiny screwdriver that I mentioned earlier. We're going to use that to adjust the screw potentiometer that is on the very top of the buck converter. This is how you control the voltage. As far as which way to turn it, you just kind of go, I think it's left is going to reduce the voltage, and right is going to increase the voltage. You can play around with it and see which one it is. It might be different on yours. And once you have it all set up and got your leads ready to go ahead and flip on the power to the talent cell and smoke.
No, God! No, God, please, no! 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 No!
So, as you can see, we got a little smoke there, and basically what happened was I made a mistake, and I had the positive and the negative wires reversed, and they were connected wrong. And so when I sent power to the buck converter, it just did not like that, and I got a little bit of smoke. Now, I think maybe the board is fried. I'm not entirely sure. It seems to still be getting voltage based on my readings from the multimeter, so I'm going to go ahead and still try to use it. I may have to end up replacing it. This is one of the reasons why I stress that you basically double check your work as much as possible, because that was a really simple rookie mistake that I made that I could have easily avoided had I just been paying a little bit more attention. Now, if you're following this video, hopefully you were paying more attention than me, and you're actually looking at your boards to see that they're connected properly. So I'm going to go ahead and switch them. It looks like I already switched them here in the video. So I'm going ahead once again and starting to test the voltage now that I actually have the proper connections made. As you can see, as I'm turning the screw, the numbers are changing on the multimeter, and it appears that even though I did possibly fry this board, it still seems to be getting voltage passed through it, so perhaps we're okay. Luckily, I have extras in case this one ends up not working in the final project. The parts list that I give for these will have a pack of multiple of them. You can also pick those up at Micro Center. So now we have basically gotten our buck converter stepped down to just about where it needs to be. You can see it's just a little over 5 volts. A little over is okay, just by a few points, and this is reading 5.07, which is just about good to go. And so now I can start adding the wires to the other side of the buck converter, the outs, which is going to be exactly the same. So you can just look at the other side. You can see the black wire from that side is already on that side, so just go ahead and solder that to that side. Easy peasy. Again, make sure you don't get these crossed. Okay, so you also want to make sure that once you start connecting your devices together, that you make sure that you connect the devices that require 5 volts of power to the proper leads of each buck converter. So once you have this buck converter stopped down to 5 volts, you know that you can only connect those leads to a device that requires 5 volts of power, which is going to be our DF player here as well as the Arduino. If you connect the bare leads that aren't being stopped down to the buck converter to either the Arduino or the DF player, you will fry them. I promise you, you will fry them, so be extra careful. Now you can start kind of connecting this stuff together using the diagram that I have provided. I'm just going to go ahead and get started here with the ground wire. It's just going to go where the designated ground pin is, and since we have the DF player on a breadboard, we're just going to poke the wire right into the pin for the ground. We're going to do the same thing for the power, which I think is going to be listed as VCC, and I believe is the very first pin on the left side of the DF player. But once again, you can check the diagram to make sure that you have that connected properly. Now we need to get started on the audio amplifier, which is this guy right here. I can't remember exactly which model this is. The model will be listed in the description below in the parts list, but this requires 12 volts of power, so you don't need a buck converter to power this. This will come directly from the bare leads that you've left for the talent cell, and those will go directly to the power on this board. And if you didn't get this exact board, your power connections might be different than mine. So mine has a little screw sort of screw lock connector, so you basically just put the wires inside and then use a screwdriver to tighten the screw down. It's kind of basic for like a speaker sort of connection. So if yours has those, this is really easy. If it doesn't have that, then you might have to do some soldering, whichever one that you got. You can use any audio amplifier as long as it's rated for the speakers that you're using, as well as has the power outputs. Some of these only take 5 volts of power, so this one just happens to be 12 volts because I wanted my Proton pack to be very loud. This is a 50 watt amp, so it is very loud. So I'm going ahead and putting the ground from my unconverted leads. So the leads I'm using are the ones that I did not run through a buck converter. I am not using a buck converter to power the audio amplifier. And just go ahead and put that in the ground using my screwdriver to tighten that up like so. And then I'm going to do the same thing with the other side with the positive. Just trim that a little bit so that it goes in there nice and snug. And just once again use my screwdriver to tighten that up. And then we have the power connected to my audio amplifier. Now we're going to move on to the speaker. This is a Boss BR S52. It is I believe it's a 60 watt speaker, 8 ohms. It might be 4 ohms. I think it's 8 ohms. And I just have a little bit of extra leftover speaker wire that I had from my last build that I'm going to use for this. You probably don't need a lot, so I'm just going to use this short little piece right here. You might need a longer length than this to actually make it fit in your pack, but this works exactly like everything else. You got your positive and your negative. You're literally going to solder these directly to the connectors on the back of the speaker, like so. Super simple. We've been doing soldering this entire time, so this is probably the easiest thing to solder of the things that we've been soldering. So I'm going to go ahead and solder these really quickly like so. Make sure your soldering iron is clean if it is not. And I just poked the wires through the little holes that are in the connectors and went to town with some solder. Make sure your connections are nice and solid. You don't want them coming loose, or you will get some weird sounds and noises when you start to put this in your pack. Whenever you start testing the sound, I would recommend that you sort of put your speaker on something that's going to absorb the vibrations that it makes, because it can be very rattly. And this is a pro tip for later, but when I started putting this in my pack, and I was using an aluminum motherboard, and I tried to mount the speaker directly to the motherboard, which created a whole bunch of rattling. The way that I combated that was by using some little spacers that I 3D printed. They were really easy. I just made them in Tinkercad. If you want them or need them, you can post in the comments below, and I'll be glad to share those with you. Some people might come up with a different way to do it. That's just the way that I did it to eliminate most of the rattling. If you're using something like an MDF or a hardboard motherboard, you probably won't experience any of that because it just won't. It'll absorb the vibrations. But this was my first time using an aluminum motherboard, so I definitely ran into some issues with that. So that's just something to look out for. So now we're going to take the speaker wires, and on my particular board, the speaker wires are adjacent to the power and the ground in the same screw terminals. Originally, when I did this, I connected one to each side, so there's a left and right positive and negative on each side. So it's left, right, and negative, or left positive and negative, and right positive and negative. And I tried to just do left positive and negative, and I had issues with the sound. So what I ended up doing was putting everything on one, or rather I put one in the left positive and one in the right negative, if that makes sense. You may have to play around with it some because everyone's boards are going to be slightly different probably, and if you run into issues and have some weirdness with the sounds, I troubleshooted this for hours, and it ended up being that I just needed to change the speaker inputs that I was using on my board. So if you're watching the video and you're seeing me connect these things, you can't really tell which ones I'm putting them into. Just look at the diagram for your board and choose the ins and outs, the positive and negatives accordingly, and you should be fine. So I'm going to go ahead and get those screwed in, and now we have our speaker connected to our audio amplifier. So now we will be able to have awesome proton pack sounds and a little bit of music, if that is your thing. And now we need to connect the DF Player Mini to the soundboard. And the way we're going to do that is by soldering some more wires. Now, if you bought the same audio amplifier as me, then you'll notice that it has little white JST connectors for your audio input. So that means that you either need to take the JST connector off so you can just solder wires directly to it, or you need to buy an additional JST connector. I opted to remove one of them so I could just solder wires directly to it. That was just the easier, cheaper way to do it. You can also buy the JST connector cables on Amazon for relatively cheap if you want to go that route. I just didn't because I wanted to keep this cheap, and I was in a position where I just wanted to go ahead and get this done. So I opted to just desolder the JST connector altogether. Okay, so the next part of this video is going to be going over how everything is connected. Once you have everything soldered together, it's going to look kind of like this. We're going to start with our buck converter here on the left hand side. With our positive and negative leads that are coming off the talent cell battery that we're going to pretend is off screen over here, going into the buck converter, and then our positive and negative leads coming out of the buck converter going to our breadboard in the power rails and the positive and the negative, as we've explained before. That is going to be powering the DF Player Mini with 5 volts of power. And then we're going to come over here to the right side. You're going to see another buck converter that also has our positive and negative leads attached to it, same way as before, also connected to the breadboard. I actually went ahead and put a cross connector. Since I connected these to this side of the breadboard, ideally you would want to connect these to the other side of the breadboard probably, because I don't really have anything that needs power connected on this side. But if for some reason you run into issues, you can always just do this. It's just important to remember that the power rails run up and down the breadboard. And when I was using the software to make this diagram, it was weird to run the wires to the other side, so that's just how I did it. But if you have this connected like so, you're going to then be giving the Arduino 5 volts of power. And of course, you'll already have the Arduino connected, as we've already gone over how to connect all of those things, with the exception of the toggle switches, which are really easy and we'll be going over in the next video. And then you're going to have your DF player also connected to your audio amplifier, which we're going to pretend is off screen just above up here with these wires. You got your ground that's going from the right side of the DF player, and then you have your ground on the left side that's going to the ground on the Arduino. You have your left and right audio channels that are going to the audio input on the amplifier. You have your TX and RX that are connected from the DF player to the Arduino with the corresponding resistors that I mentioned that I ended up needing to use. And of course, your VCC power connector, and then your busy pin on the right hand side of the DF player is going to the pin 12 on the Arduino. So if you need to just reference this, you can. You probably have some of these already connected if you're already working on this like I have been. And then of course, you're going to have your speaker connectors, which I don't have them listed on here for some reason, but you'll see them. Your speakers are going to go to your speaker. So I'm going to pull up just a slightly different diagram here using the fantastic Microsoft Paint. This is just of the actual audio amplifier that I'm using, if you're using the same one, to kind of explain what I was talking about earlier. As you can see here, we've got our VIN positive and negative. That's going to go to your battery, the 12 volt leads that are not being stepped down by a buck converter, and then you have your positive and negative left and right channel speakers. I mentioned earlier that I had some issues with the sound. What I originally did was connected the positive to the left channel and the negative to the right channel, and what you really need to do is do positive and negative to either the left or the right, not both. So that is what I did, and that seemed to fix my issues. Now, for the digital audio input that's coming from the DF player mini that I just explained, that's going to be one of these two connectors right here. And I mentioned earlier when I was doing the soldering that my audio board came with these little JST connectors. This is what I was referring to, JST connectors. And I just ended up unsoldering one of these because you can use either or. I just ended up unsoldering one of these and just soldering wires directly to it. You could use a connector if you want to, but the DF player doesn't have connectors for it, so I just went ahead and used straight wire. And then of course you have some other connectors if you so choose to use those. And then I'm going to finish this up by going to another diagram that one of the other users on the 3D printed Ghostbusters props created. His name is Matt. His last name starts with an S, and I'm not even going to try to pronounce it because I know I will do it wrong. But he used my tutorial videos to finish up a proton pack of his own. And he created this diagram that's much better than anything I could come up with. So hopefully he's okay with me showing it to you guys. He actually integrated the little the new afterlife power switch into his, which is really cool. I'm going to do that on my next one. So thanks for coming up with that. He's using the 6,000 milliamp talent cell battery that I mentioned at the very beginning of the video with the 5 volt USB. So he basically bypassed using the buck converters altogether, which I said you could do earlier. This is just an example of how you might do that if you just want to not use the buck converters at all. Get this battery and you'll be able to do that. But you can see in his diagram how he has the audio amplifier connected. His audio amplifier is a little bit different than mine. It's mostly the same. That's why I said check yours. Make sure all the connections are going to mostly be the same. They might be in a slightly different position, but they're mostly going to be the same. And so you just kind of wire everything just like he has it here. You got your speaker outs. You got your digital audio connectors right here going to the corresponding digital audio inputs from the DF Player Mini. You got your ground, as I mentioned before. And one last thing I will note before I call this video done, because I know you guys have been waiting a long time for this video, and I still have a couple more to make, is I went the extra step, and you don't have to do this, but if you want to, it's relatively easy. I wanted to put the volume knob for my amplifier in my crank knob on my Proton pack, and my board comes with one of them, as you can see, just like his does. So what I did was desoldered the pins on this potentiometer and added some shortish wires to it so that I could move the potentiometer and put it inside my crank knob. It was a little tricky, but for the amount of soldering we've already been doing, it's really not that difficult. Just desolder the pins. The desoldering of the pins is the most difficult part because there's like 6 of them, and it's a kind of a pain to get them to come loose. But if you can get them loose, then you can resolder the potentiometer back to the board with some wires so that you can move it. And then you can house that in your crank knob and be able to turn the volume up and down using your Proton Pack's crank knob. So if that's something you want to do, that's definitely a cool feature to have. That's what I did on mine, but you don't have to. Anyway, I want to finish this video up. There's a couple of more videos to go. We're almost there. We're almost to the finish line. And then I'm about to start another Proton Pack. So until next time, happy busting.